Okay, so our session today is a Think Big session and brainstorming about A/B testing. So a little bit about the session and a little bit about A/B testing. So the session is basically to discuss the feature on a high level and to throw out ideas of how we would like this to look. Hopefully we could also form an MVC out of this conversation, but it's not like a must-have. We can also do that asynchronously, but it's important for me to discuss the feature and to hear your feedback about it and different angles that we can take. So that's a little bit about the purpose of the session. And now a little bit about A/B testing. So I imagine that everyone knows what A/B testing is, but I will spend like a few minutes discussing it on a high level. So A/B testing, I would say, is like a flavor of feature flags, which lets you leverage different audiences. So when you think about a feature flag, which is either on or off for a specific user or group or whatever strategy we have in the future, A/B testing allows you to take a decision based on what the behavior is for a specific audience. So the feature flag here is not on or off. It gives you different options that someone will get. So to make it really simplistic, let's say we have a website and we want to see what color the user prefers. So some of the users are going to get a yellow interface and some of them are going to get a green interface. And then basically we can then later on look at some measurements and see what the users liked better. And then you could then decide that the chosen color is going to be yellow forever and close the feature flag. It doesn't have to be a temporary feature flag. So A/B testing can also say that you have different flavors per user, like for infinite time. So you can say, I don't know, users in different geolocations will get different set of features. And you can basically manage it with variance. So you can think about it like a switch case in code, where each case is a different endpoint that the user would get. And each user gets, you know, whatever their if statement resonated to. That's like in a very general sense of what A/B testing is. Now, the persona that we look at for A/B testing is also interesting because it is not necessarily a developer or a project manager or product manager, which is the usual persona for feature flags. The persona in A/B testing could even be a sales manager. It can be an executive. And why am I saying that? Because sometimes A/B testing results have to do with, let's say, revenue. So imagine that you have a website that is a shopping website. So you want to make sure that you have a lot of customers adding a bunch of things to their carts. And you want to see which flow makes the users add more items to the carts. So basically what you do is you do a regular A/B test, and then you look at which flow generated more items in the cart or generated more purchases. So then you can make an executive decision to say, okay, this one is making me more money, and this is why I'm going to choose this flow. So even the persona in terms of A/B testing is different. It might not be a technical person, and it's usually someone who's looking more at money, right? So this is really interesting to think about. And another really interesting thing about A/B testing is that a lot of the decisions are based on metrics that are collected, and we'll talk about in our brainstorming session about what metrics we might need to measure and how. But the idea is somehow visually, in order to make this decision, a user needs to know like what's going on with the different cases, and based on that, make their decision on which one is the right flow. So that was a very, I guess, long introduction to what we're just going to discuss. Are there any questions up until now? No.
I have a question. I'm curious, like, where does this initial idea comes from to add A/B testing to GitLab? Is it competition? Is it user request needs?
That's a great question, Nadia. So it's a little a combination of everything. So GitLab is a little bit late to the game with feature flags. A/B testing is I wouldn't say basic feature, but it's definitely something that most of our competitors have, and it's something that's, you know, has been used for years in the industry. It's not like something new or something that we invented. I would think one of the most important customers that actually asked for this is our own growth team. So we already have a potential for dog fooding, which is really exciting. So the way that growth wants to use this is, imagine, well, you don't have to imagine, they just told me the use case. The use case is they want to see how we can onboard people faster to GitLab. So onboarding means that this is a new user. It could be a user that has been using GitLab for a month, for 3 months, doesn't matter. They bucket the users here according to age, and they want to make the experience for the early users easier by helping them out with in-product, guidance and things like that. So they want to feature flag issues based on the user that is there and the creation date of the user in GitLab. So that's a use case of who would get features, specific features in our own growth team. But also, as I said, revenue is a big deal. So if you want to see, is there a flow that makes users purchase premium or purchase ultimate or something like that? This is really interesting for, anyone, any executive in our company, but in any company. It's also, there's a lot of buzz this year about progressive delivery, and A/B testing is definitely something that comes up a lot that relates to progressive delivery. Since this has a specific decision on at the end of the day what the deployment is going to be. We can also think about A/B testing as post-deployment metrics, because you're deploying something, you're collecting metrics about something, and then that affects your decision about how you're going to deploy it in the future. So this also connects to continuous delivery. It's like connects everywhere within the team is the way that I'm thinking about it.
I see, cool. And what are some of the competition that we are maybe looking like as an example, or what is a good example of a competitor that has this feature like successfully maybe?
So our biggest competitor in feature flags and also in terms of A/B testing is LaunchDarkly. They have a nice UI that they use. I have read different blogs about how to connect Unleash to Google Analytics, for example, to achieve this, which is an option that we can explore. And Andrew, which I'm going to pass the mic to in a minute, has also looked into something called Variance that Unleash has. And I'll let Andrew talk a little bit about that. So because Andrew is drinking, I'm going to give like a little bit of introduction. Unleash is what we're basing our feature flag solution on. So they're kind of our foundation, but recently they also decided that they're going commercial. So they're also a competitor, but also like an open source that we're basing on, but also something that we're looking at as a competitor.
Okay. Can everybody hear me? Yeah?
Yep.
Okay. So Unleash has a, as Ari said, Unleash has a feature called Variance that is supposed to be their version of A/B testing, which is currently very simple and straightforward at this time. Fortunately for us, all the client side stuff is done and working as far as I can tell. And all we would have to really do is add some nice UI UX window dressing on setting up the variants and making sure that they work nice. And we would actually be able to get pretty far along without doing anything else. I'm trying to spin up my version of Unleash right now, so that I can kind of show it off. But basically, as we can see in Orit's screen share, we have a variant here with some colors. On Unleash's side right now, the weights are automatically split evenly. So that would be one adjustment that we can make on our side without impacting any of Unleash's code, is like having the ability for users to modify how often a specific variant would come up. If we get into Unleash, I can show how people kind of tell Unleash what their payload is going to be, along with some typing. But again, because as long as we have a mechanism to insert that data on our side, then all of the client side work is done for us. It's fun. You have to turn on variants in Unleash with a feature flag.
It's a nice using feature flags within feature flags.
Gets me every time. Another interesting fact is the feature flag variants have the ability to kind of stick or pin on specific values, similar to how their percent-based rollouts work. There's a little bit of a blurb down in there, but basically it tries to find a user ID, and if it can't find a user ID, it tries to find a session ID, and if it can't find a session ID, it finds the remote address of the request. So it's like a very tiered approach to how one would kind of specify who is getting what. As for the strategies impacting a variant, how come that didn't work? They don't have too much going on there as far as I'm aware, which is slightly unfortunate. And we might need to look into how we want to handle that. But again, all the client side work is done for 4 languages, including, yeah, for those 4 languages. You can kind of look at the limitations and decide, and we can go over which we can fix and which we can't fix. The first one there, setting the variant weights, is something that we can absolutely handle without touching Unleash code. The other 2, I think, are probably less likely to be able to be handled on just our side. We need to restart this now.
Let's say that we're using percent rollout strategy and not user ID. And let's say we have an uneven number like 3. How would that work?
If you have 3 and you enter it into Unleash today, you would end up with one having a weight of 34 and the other 2 having 33.
Okay, so that's fine. I think that's fine.
And then it's all a random kind of number based system. My variants aren't showing up. This is sad. So
let's say that we do use this beta feature, which may change, may or may not change. And assume that we're using this simple example where we have 5 colors. How do we know, like how it, again, we need some kind of dashboard to create a decision. Is there something like that Unleash has today, or no?
Yes, so Unleash does have a section in its database side of things to handle metrics on how often a feature flag is toggled, how often a variant is toggled, kind of results on what those return values are. If we go into
The API?
yeah, if we go into the API in the top right, and we can look at their metrics endpoints, in the first half, I guess is better. Like this is what a client would send. Basically, it's like the toggles, the toggle name, how often they get toggled, in which direction, and then what's missing here is also the variant side of stuff that does get triggered here, but because it's a beta feature, it's not really documented.
So it would say like blue somewhere,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, and it would be like the number of times people got blue, and then and we're actually receiving those metrics every day from people who use our feature flag client or our feature flag setup already, but we have no way to store them right now, and we don't really have, and I don't know there on unlike the metric side of things how we would want to hook that up, whether we'd want to do something with like Prometheus or I don't know what our other metrics collectors are.
So
Google
interesting.
Analytics sounds fine, but at the same time, I don't know if we want to rely on yet another third-party service if we're trying to be the one application that does it all.
So it's interesting. I saw a blog post that shows you how to connect Unleash to Google Analytics. We don't currently use Google Analytics as in GitLab, but we do use Prometheus, which is also an option. So I prefer, building on top of things that we know. But
Yeah.
they're both valid ways, to implement this. So let's go back to the metrics today, which besides from A/B testing would still be interesting to understand for us, just to count toggles, because we've been like trying to figure out how many people are using feature flags regardless to A/B testing. So it may be worthwhile to build something internally for us.
I think it would be super handy as a feature, generally speaking. If like these metrics are an important decision-making factor in A/B testing, I imagine like that's still definitely going to be data we want to capture, and we may as well capture all the metrics and give people like a good dashboard of their toggles.
Okay. Yeah.
If you want to, I can share my screen and I can kind of show how the toggles or how the variants work today. Again, it's like not very smart, so don't expect too much. But basically, we have a little variant tab now. We can just name our variant. We can say its variant is like green. The payload is always a string at the moment, so we could just do green. We could do a hex value. We could also sneakily, if like I'm the one creating these variants and I know what I expect the payload to be, we can absolutely throw like some JSON in there. And that will
payload kind of like our description today.
The payload is the value of the variant, right? So like if you're writing your program and you're like, I'm requesting, in the color example, I'm requesting a color. What color do I want? And that would be our payload. So it's equivalent to kind of the final true false value on a feature flag.
Mm-hmm.
And then we can add some overrides based off of user IDs at the moment. So like all those user IDs should get green every time. And we can add another one. And as we can see, the weights automatically decrease because you can't manually edit those because that's not yet a thing. And now we have red, color, red, and so on and so forth. But as long as all we're doing is kind of modifying what's within this form, on the GitLab side of things, the Unleash clients should be able to understand it.
You add a third just to answer the 3 questions. I'm just curious.
Sorry, can you say that again?
I just want to see a third to see what they do with the percent. Yeah, 34, 33, 33.
Yeah.
Mike, I think this has to be like a totally different dashboard than the one we currently have, which is like the index page for the feature flags. Like we should probably introduce a new like metrics board.
Yeah, so I think this could probably fit into like your normal strategy creation, like a form similar to this done in our GitLab style. I think would fit into the strategy creation thing. But yeah, we're going to need the data side of it more on the
I will create a new issue,
level
or
up for this.
I'll create a new issue for collecting metrics besides from A/B testing, because I think it's valuable even today. But it does need additional thinking in terms of A/B testing of what we want to collect and how. Because the API is very limited. Like you get the toggle state and I guess the variance, right? But it doesn't give you like additional data, which if we would connect Prometheus, for example, we could get like so much more options.
Well, that's the part that I always struggle with this is because in A/B testing, like that's half of the equation, right? Like, sure, X number of people got this as green, but that's only half of the story. What you really need to know in A/B testing is what result did that produce, which is usually like 3 pages down the line, they click this button, right? Like it launched them into this flow that resulted in X thing happening. And for that, we are going to need some sort of like feedback loop that is going to have to live outside of this system.
I think that makes a lot of sense. I think Unleash is ultimately extremely focused on providing the toggle functionality, and anything outside of that appears to be out of their scope. So yeah, I think we will probably need something on top of this that we can kind of glue together. But if it's just like some easy API endpoint, easy API endpoints or something like that. But yeah, we can see here. This is just a smatter of JavaScript, but we can see that the variants are captured as part of the metrics that Unleash creates. So while they're not shown in that endpoint, they will be in the final payload of somebody using variants.
Yeah, so I'm going to step away from the money side of the business. And if we talk about, like, for example, performance and checking performance based on a variant, I think that's something that we could probably connect. I think that already exists today in the monitor team. So that's like something really interesting that we can do with this. Revenue is even more interesting, but I think that's a little bit more trickier and based on business and like how, you need to put some kind of breadcrumbs in order to collect it later on. I think.
Sounds like a solution for like Meltano or something.
Yeah. But you know, people that use A/B testing, that's like the most, they create experiments. That's one of the lingos that it's called in, I don't know, I don't remember which competitor, but that's what they do. They create experiments and then they get metrics back and the experiments, and then they decide on the result of the experiment based on whatever was collected. So I think we have some time until we get there, but we can definitely leverage what we already have.
Absolutely. I think if we wanted to go down the variant path, it would be a good little MVC and like new functionality, I guess. Even if it's only, I'd say, a quarter of the story, like it would be a good starting point.
Yeah, I also agree it's a good starting point. So to figure out how to do this, basically we would need to, what would you need to do on the tables that we're currently working on, Jason?
More tables. More tables.
Yes, more tables.
How about IIDs? That's like my scariest point.
Sorry, I'm thinking about that. What would we need to do on the tables we have now? What to like just start capturing the metrics?
Well, capturing the metrics, would you need an IID for that?
I think with the capturing metrics thing, would we want to just funnel them into Prometheus does the metrics capturing, right? Like I'm not, I'm getting that right. Like they store those metrics and then you fetch them later.
Yeah, and then you could use Grafana or something else to view them. Yeah.
So, and that's like, is that normally part of our GitLab deployment? You would have like some or whatever the monitor team is doing. Maybe if you just we can just funnel all that information into monitor.
Prometheus is part of like the GitLab installation, whatever. So it's already included. And someone told me that CD is like the entry point to monitor. So I guess it's true for this as well. And they already have like a bunch of APIs that we can also use in order to make this richer. At least from a performance standpoint, but not as an MVC.
Yeah, and if there's a way to make it to publish those things in some sort of standardized way, like syslog or something else, then it leads you to more flexibility if we needed to like integrate with Segment or some other thing, right? We want to republish these packets out for whatever other user behavior tracking thing that they might want to use somewhere else, right?
Yeah. So another really interesting thing, I have another issue that I'm working on with the monitor team, and it turns out that we already have in place incidence response for when an error rate is met and Prometheus collects the metrics. We already have like a bunch of metrics that they're collecting. If the error rate is reached, it automatically opens an issue. And we could probably leverage that for example, like, no, this variant is not getting traffic or is less than 10%. It can open an issue and tell you like, remove the variant. Which could be pretty neat. Also not an MVC, but still like things that pop into mind.
Yeah, but I think ideally metrics wise, we throw that whole burden on somebody else.
But it does raise an interesting point. Like we just kind of talked about, a dashboard living somewhere here, right? Does that make sense, or do we leverage everything else that the monitor team is doing, and that's where your dashboards live, and we build connection points there? I think that's something that we probably need to do as a follow-up with the monitor team to decide where exactly this data is going to live, because I think there's a big case for it living very close to the feature flags, but like if all your other data is somewhere else and then this is segmented off, that doesn't make a lot of sense either. So I think we need to have a sync with them and figure out where this is going to live. And then probably some testing around that as well.
So what I think we need to separate these metrics into two. One of them is purely feature flag related, and that's what we're getting from the Unleash API, the metrics that just tell you, here's the variance that we're getting, which is valuable on itself because a customer would want to know like the distribution of the feature flags and what's actually happening. And then we have everything that's post-deployment, which is Prometheus and going forward. So I actually think we need two dashboards. And like, that's my opinion, but I'm happy to hear your own.
I would tend to agree with that. As far as I remember, I feel like Prometheus focuses mainly on system metrics, right? That might not be the only thing it focuses on, but I would also make that separation that you were mentioning, Marit.
Yeah. What I'm really interested
that
in
should not a potential integration of sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Okay, I was just saying, yeah, that should not rule out like maybe a future integration of those variants into Prometheus, but like just when I think of Prometheus right away, I feel like I only think of metrics, system metrics, and not like those A/B testing flavored metrics that we are talking about here.
So you're thinking like CPU usage, memory allocation.
Yeah, I would need to go back to the documentation
Yeah.
about that. But as far as I remember, when seeing it on the deploy board and just like on the app in general, I feel like it was more tech related.
Those are definitely the predefined metrics for Prometheus, but like users can customize and basically measure anything.
Yeah, I think ultimately it's just a data bucket that handles kind of like what you'd expect a metric, a time-driven metric anyways, to look like, right? As long as you have timestamps on your payloads, then they can probably figure it out. And then it would be up to somebody to build queries around collecting and displaying that data, which I know we on the front end have some fun libraries for embedding charts of data from Prometheus. So there could potentially be a good plan there where we display some like very simple metrics close to the feature flags while still keeping all the data with like the rest of the data, the rest of the metrics. And then if you go over to monitor, you might be able to get some like fancy cross-join data displays.
I'm interested about is there a difference between self-managed customers and .com users?
In like what kind of?
In terms of the metrics that we're collecting from Unleash?
No, I wouldn't say there is.
And the metrics are like project-based?
Well, so the difference is like the metrics from Unleash go to self-managed hosts for self-managed people, right? Like we don't get those.
No, that's fine that we don't get it. I'm just thinking, are the metrics on a project level? Are they on
Yes.
like
Project level? Yeah.
Okay, so it'd also be interesting to think about a higher level dashboard that includes like all my projects.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is an ultimate feature.
I think we should I think step one here is just to like figure out the best way to collect and store these metrics, and then we can look at displaying them.
Yeah, absolutely.
We can maybe kind of do both at the same time a little bit, but like start simple. And then for the variance side of things, I don't know what the best user experience would be for that, but I imagine they're almost complicated enough to be like a separate entity outside of feature flags, even though they share a lot of the like configuration and display. And
You mean in terms of a strategy? Like this is like if I choose A/B testing as a strategy, it would like open up in a different window or something like that. Is that what you're?
yeah, something like if we can look again at the, and I'd have to like play around with this a little more, but if we look at these variants here, like it's still in Unleash anyways, it's still a feature flag with strategies, and that like doesn't make any sense to me. I don't know why, like I don't understand how this side of things impacts this side of things. And if it does at all, really. And if it doesn't, then why are they in the same page is my question.
It's not, it's a variant of a particular strategy. Is that true? No.
It would be more fair to say that you can either request a feature flag status or you can request its variance.
Oh.
And the strategies impact its enabled status, or you do like default, or you do flexible rollout, or whatever other strategies you want to add, or you can request its variance. And that's like, because they're like two totally separate API calls in the client. So I don't like, as far as I can tell, they shouldn't impact each other, and I'm not sure why it's designed this way.
Well, I wonder if that's not part of like the beta-ness to it. They haven't quite figured it out yet. Maybe.
It is still a beta feature, so
Yeah.
that would make sense.
It has been a beta feature for a while now.
Any like blog posts or roadmaps about when they think that would be a non-beta? No.
I think they're busy spinning up their hosted functionality and getting all that going, and then working on their constraint-based feature flags, which I think we've talked about before. Those are like the big ones.
So variance, is it like basically a percentage rollout, but with like the option to set the percent?
It's like percentage rollout, but instead of getting true or false, you can get any number of variants, I guess.
Yeah, the string, right?
Yeah.
I could see a world though where you want to, like with GitLab Next, right? Like you only want to A/B test on a subset of people that have agreed to see new stuff, right? Like your core users don't get to see this variance. So I could see a world where you would want both a feature flag strategy and variance as well.
Well, so there was yeah, that's true. That's probably true. There's also like the user ID based one as well, which I showed it off a little bit, but like that would tie nicely into if we're keeping track of user lists later on, like you could have some like overlap there between feature flags and variants.
But in that way, it is kind of sort of technically possible to do an A/B test with what we have now, right? Or what we'll have soon.
We have for 50-50
Yeah.
with variant.
Okay. Only 50-50.
If you're doing something like,
And
if you want to do,
yeah,
if you want to do something like a button position test or something like that, your options are either new position or old position. Whereas with the variants, you can try any number of positions.
Okay.
Yeah, you get real complicated with user IDs, right? And you could do whatever you want. You could absolutely be running. I don't know how you would collect the metric on it to know which one, but would be possible.
Yeah, that's the other thing too, is like the feature flag strategies don't exactly, or the metrics, as far as I can tell, don't exactly tell you why something was toggled. They just tell you the direction it was toggled, which is frustrating. I think that one is a pretty big limitation.
Okay, so it looks like we kind of know, at least for the MVC, that we want to use unleash variants, right? And display them still near feature flags at the moment. We're using the API metrics of unleash and not connect them yet to Prometheus or anything else. So this requires also like the API, the new dashboard, or whatever we want to call it, and the new variants UX, also API, I assume, because not everyone wants to use UX. What am I missing? Oh, we also need, like, I guess, to add everything to the audit log, but it's just one way, like same as today, like who created it, what time. It has nothing to do with toggles. Does that sound right?
Yeah.
And Jason, did you want to add any IID here in the mix?
Please no.
Okay.
I think
Anything
if
else?
variants, I think if variants end up being slightly separate than feature flags, they should probably have an IID.
Mike, what are your thoughts?
'Cause I imagine-
I hate to be the UX guy who says like testing. I don't know. I refuse to answer a question, but testing is the only way to answer it. But I mean, this is a big enough thing that I honestly don't know, right? I can honestly like I could see it just living in strategy world and it's just a thing and it's an additional strategy type. I could also see it the other way where it's a completely segmented out thing. I think we're going to have to prototype and get some feedback on it. So I don't know. Yeah.
That makes sense. I think if they're segmented out, they should definitely have IIDs though.
Right.
Because we'll probably want to treat them like feature flags and link to things and stuff like that similarly.
The upshot is we have a issue already for validation on A/B testing prototype for this milestone, I believe.
Well, it's not problem validation, it's solution validation.
Yeah, sorry, solution validation.
So I think the problem is pretty clear. It's the solution.
Yes, yes.
So let's write down our action items. So we need to figure out the UX validation. I actually think, Mike, that the right approach here would be to like not to create a discussion guide, but just to like do a bunch of mock-ups and see with using variants, which variant is the right one.
Yep, I agree. I don't think this has to be a long drawn out thing, and I don't think we need actual customers. I think we could probably leverage our internal folks or some of the people that we've already talked to for this. I think what we need is prototypes of both ways and then feedback on why people like which one and why. So yeah, hopefully this is something we can accomplish in the, not turning into a long drawn out 2-3 milestone thing. I think we can accomplish this relatively quickly. And as far as creating them, I had this pretty high on my list of things to do in the very near future. So we kind of have the pattern in place. We're not talking about wildly new different fields or anything like that. So the mocking up of it should not be terribly difficult. Just need to work it through the process. That's what I'm saying.
Okay, so I'm just going to recap the action items in case anyone has any more comments or questions or anything they want to say before that, like feel free.
The one thing I do want to say though is we get to MVC and we're capturing metrics on variance. I think that's great and that's absolutely where we should start. But that next piece after that, right, the connecting it to the data that makes it so much more valuable, I think we really need to start thinking about how we're going to do that, because one step in the wrong direction, once we go down that path, will be disastrous, right? We need to make sure we pick the right, are we going to hook into other things and like kind of an open API thing, or are we going to GitLab, like this is all internal tool? So MVC, yes, but we need to have a clear plan on that before we start down that path, because that will have dramatic impacts that we will.
Yeah, I agree, but as always, let's iterate on it. Like we know what we want to do for the MVC. Yeah, the second phase is totally unclear. Also worth validating, by the way.
Yeah.
And maybe even there we can start with problem validation. Like, what do users even want to accomplish from A/B testing? Like, we need to figure out what's interesting. And that will also point us in the direction of whether to leverage the performance metrics that we currently have with Prometheus or go like to totally different path. Again, I think money is the most important, and that's not built into GitLab today, but I'm not exactly sure how to do that. So that's also interesting, which maybe also needs its own validation. But slowly, we're only like 2 people validating. So so let's do it slowly.
My gut feeling on it though is we're going to have to go the hook into other things. Like Chase said, segment. Like there is a whole industry that this is all this does. And I know we like to do everything as an internal tool here, but like this is a whole industry that we're backing into after tackling its own industry of feature flags, you know, that I just don't see how we're ever going to compete in that market in the near future. So connecting to a segment and a Google Analytics seems like such an easier win.
Well,
But we'll have to see.
I already saw a blog post that shows you how to connect Unleash to Google Analytics. So that like shortens the research time by far. Again, it's introducing another third party that we haven't yet done in GitLab. Not saying it's a bad thing, it's just like a thing that we probably need to learn. But definitely like any user that's doing websites would gain value from this Google Analytics, like how many pings, how many people went into this page, how many people did this, like it's an awesome tool, right? So it's definitely worth investigating. I don't know to take the decision now, but you know, this is why we're brainstorming and like throwing these things out there so we can later watch this recording and open all these issues. Okay, so with the like 12 minutes we have left, I'm just going to recap shortly. So we have the UX validation, which we're going to move into prototype validation rather than discussion guide. Well, not on top of, I guess, just making it the majority. I need to open a new issue for the MVC that basically says that we're going to work on variance, build on top of variance, using, I don't know, we still need to figure out the UX based on whatever the research item goes in. So that's going to be open-ended at the moment. The proposal is just going to say variance without like how to configure them yet. So maybe we'll start with API. Again, and then add the UX later, if it's going to be like part of feature flags or a different one. So we still have a little bit of leeway to make the decision, but I guess the API one is pretty clear. I need to open a new issue on collecting metrics regardless to A/B testing, because we can still collect those metrics today. Which will be part of feature flags. Am I missing anything?
We do have that dashboard epic, I think that's out there. I think a lot of this will play into that. So just throwing that out there.
I actually opened that epic while we were talking, and it's not really related to this because that dashboard has to do with like the age of feature flags. Like it's not related to like metrics or the client side. It's more like feature flag management dashboard. Like, here are all my feature flags in the project. Here's when they were created. Here is like this one is rolled out 100%. You could probably turn it off. Ability to filter and sort that thing. So it's a little bit different. It's more about the index page. Maybe it's poorly worded.
Yeah. If you want to watch Andrew and Jason have a heart attack, like I could see a world where it's a customizable dashboard that you can put whatever metrics you want on there. It'd be great.
No more dashboards. We've been through too much.
We'll just slap in an IID there and then you'll be fine.
You're trying to make me pass out.
Oh, come on. We have to be able to joke about it. We're past it. Like you can joke about it now.
Are we though?
Is it too soon? Yeah.
Yeah, we're still grieving.
Cool. Anything else? Well, great. Thank you all. I will post this on the channel. I'm not sure if I should post it to YouTube because yet I'll ask about that. But I'll post it to the channel for anyone who's interested and was not able to make it, and for further reference. And again, thank you. Bye.
Thanks.
Thanks.